Hey everyone, welcome to Legally TT, and of course, I'm your girl, Legally TT. If you're new here, thanks for stopping by, and if you're returning, thanks for coming back. So, we're going to continue on in this series with making a wig on the sewing machine. So now it's time to sew down our frontal. So, let's get started. I'm actually going to pin it, and also, that's what, as you can see, this is where that fold starts to go away. And you can't see any of the fold up here. So all of that fold is going to end up cut out when we're done. So you won't have to worry about that. I don't know the name of the stitch offhand, but I will put it in the description below. The stitch that I use while sewing my wigs. For this here, I want you guys to see, I go through the band on the frontal and just through the cap, mesh dome cap. I don't go through the elastic band. That's just my preference, and it's not a big deal even if I do, because I'm going to probably reinforce it with the sewing machine. So let's get to sewing. Through the band and just through the cap. Now we're getting to where we're just at the cap, so just through the band and through the cap. What I will say, don't skimp on purchasing a mannequin if you are going to purchase a mannequin. I did that the first time I purchased a mannequin to hand sew a whole wig. And what happened was it didn't have this canvas on it. It had just regular fabric on it. And I sewed my wig to the mannequin. Yep, I sewed it to the mannequin. I was able to get it off. I'll show you guys that mannequin. So this is that mannequin. And it's just regular. It actually is like that regular cotton, it's kind of like a sock. It's kind of what it feels like. So this is what happened. I ended up just cutting the fabric off this mannequin. So do not just buy any old mannequin. Now I just use this one for styling. I don't sew on it because I don't want to sew another wig to the cap of the mannequin. Yeah, that wasn't fun. To take it off and be done, the hours I had put into it and realized I couldn't get it off. So make sure you get the mannequin that is covered in canvas. I use the GEX brand on Amazon. I'll drop a link in the description box below. Let me move this one. I keep grabbing that one. So you guys can get that one if you'd like. If you know another brand, go right ahead. But through the cap, through the band, through the cap. I make pretty small stitches just to make sure. I learned that the larger stitches end up with buckles in between them. That's just what I have experienced. Maybe it's just me being a novice, but hey. So I make smaller stitches so I don't have buckles in between my stitches. So as a novice, if you're starting and you're going to make your own, make smaller stitches, you're less likely to have buckles in between them. You can also pin this down in a few more places if you'd like. This is progress so far. So we're getting to the middle, so I am going to stop sewing from this side and I'm going to start sewing from the other side. I do have another needle and thread, so we're just going to grab that one and sew on the other side if you guys want to see what it looks like. So far, this is what she looks like. One of the other things to mention while you're sewing, personally, I make sure I don't go too far away from the weft or the closure or frontal. What I mean is, when I take the needle underneath here, through here, because I always go through the top, I make sure I don't catch the cap here with the needle point and come through, because that'll bunch the cap up and you don't want that. So I make sure I get usually right up under or right in front is where I make sure the needle catches, so I don't catch too far and bunch the cap. If you guys hear the girls again, because they're back, they left and they came back, I'm sorry. So we are going to start on this side. And again, we go through the band of the frontal and then through just the cap. In my first stitch, I usually just go through the middle of the thread. Like I said, I am going to reinforce this on the sewing machine, so I'm not too worried. This side is usually, coming from this side is usually easier for me as well, just because the thread and needle tends to fall exactly where I need it for me to stitch. Move this one. It's kind of getting in my way. I haven't cut it because I normally go over from one side or the another. And I typically hold on to my thread so it's taut all the way through, and to also make sure that I pull it tight. So we're still on the band, so we're just going through the cap and through the band of the frontal, not the band of the cap. Just my preference. But I will sew through that band when I reinforce the frontal. Once I put on the last weft, I typically make sure I catch the end of my cap. I catch the end of the cap, if y'all didn't catch that, because the ball squeaked. As you can see, sometimes I pull it back, pull a needle back out, because I've caught too much of my cap. So I have to go back. I'm a perfectionist, so I like to get it right the first time. So if it takes me a little longer to do it, I'm okay with that, as long as it's done right. So sometimes hairs get caught and causes it to kind of snag, make the thread snag. You could potentially sew this on with the sewing machine, but I just prefer to hand sew it once again, because that would mean I would go and hand sew it on the sewing machine, or sew it on the sewing machine, come back to my mannequin, Tabitha, come back to my mannequin and, you know, make my guidelines and all that good stuff. This, hand sewing it while on the mannequin, I also feel like it gives you a true fit. Because like I said before, you got to think about the fact that once you take the cap off the mannequin head, it is no longer stretched, and they are stretchy caps, so it stretches to go on the mannequin head if you are using like perfect sizing, or something that has to stretch to that size. So with this method of using a slightly larger cap, it's not going to stretch nearly as much, but I still prefer to just sew this on the mannequin and then sew my wefts on with the sewing machine after I have made my guidelines. We are almost done, ladies and gents. This is not a process for anyone that is impatient, because it takes a minute, and for me at least, I feel like you gotta be precise. You can't just, you know, do it any old kind of way if you want them to last. And I'll show you guys before I start to close this up that it is still flat in the middle. We come into the middle and it's still flat. So I did a pretty good job. And if you can't see, yes, I do go through the loop. Like I said, I will put what stitch I use down in the description below. If you have any questions about it, feel free to drop it in the comments and I will answer your questions. So we're starting to get to the point where I am going to cross over the other side stitching just to make sure that it's nicely closed up at the top. Just my preference to make sure it's nice and secure and it ain't going nowhere. My stitches are usually a little bigger when I start to cross over because I just don't need them as big because they are crossing over already an already stitched location. So I only do a few to overlap. And now we can knot this up. Make one more stitch. Well, if I can grab it correctly with my needle, but seeing as though it's at the top, it's a little difficult to see. We wrapped our thread around 3 times and we pulled. And as you can see, this is where the other stitch was stopped, and this is where this one stopped. You can see where they stop. I'm going to go through one more time on the other side so I can knot it, but I can actually cut this one and move on because our frontal is now attached. I cut it a little longer so I can knot it. Move that out the way. Get this one knotted up, and then we can move on to our lines, our guidelines, and how I do that. So one more stitch going this way. 1, 2, 3 around the needle and pull it through. This way. Hold on. This is why I hold my thread, because it started to kind of wind up on itself and it'll knot. And there we go. So now we can cut both sides. So I'm cut this side. And we can just knot it and cut it down short so that you can't see it. So that one's done. And we just cut right there. And this side. We will do this and knot it twice or tie it twice to make sure the knot stays, and cut it. And this is how we look. So that is the finished product. of sewing down your frontal. Nice and flush, no buckles. Those tabs are right there. We still have finger width in the front and also have finger width on the side and on this side. That was just my check for myself. So my frontal is complete. So now we've prepped our cap and sewed down our frontal. So now it's time to make those guidelines so we can get to that sewing machine and get this wig popping. So make sure you like this video and subscribe to this channel and turn on those good old notifications so that you know when the next video is coming and we can get you started.